The ache in my lower back had become a permanent companion by the 6th hour of my shift. Each step across La Fenicie's polished marble floor, sending a dull throb through muscles that had long forgotten what rest felt like. The scent of fresh basil and slow-simmered tomato sauce clung to my uniform like a second skin, mingling with the faint traces of expensive wine that had splashed onto my apron during the dinner rush. I balanced 3 plates of ossobuco on my left arm, while navigating between tables filled with men in suits that cost more than my monthly rent, and women dripping in diamonds that caught the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. La Fenice was not the kind of restaurant where someone like me belonged as anything other than staff. Tucked into a brownstone on Arthur Avenue, it had survived 3 generations of ownership by the Caruso family and had become the unofficial gathering place for every Italian family that mattered in the Bronx and beyond. The walls were covered in photographs of old Naples, of fishing boats and sun-bleached coastlines that my Nonna Caterina used to describe in her stories before bed. I had grown up on those tales, on the cadence of Neapolitan dialect and the smell of her ragu simmering for hours on Sunday mornings. Now I served ragu to strangers who never looked at my face, only at the plates I carried. Julia, table 12 needs their check, and the private room wants another bottle of the Barolo. Marco, the floor manager, appeared at my elbow with his ever-present clipboard, his eyes darting across the dining room like a hawk searching for prey. He was a short man with thinning hair and a perpetual sheen of sweat on his forehead, the kind of person who thrived on other people's stress. And there's a new guy working tonight. Antonio called in sick, so they sent someone from the agency. Keep an eye on him. Make sure he doesn't embarrass us. I nodded, depositing the ossobuco at table 7 with a practiced smile before glancing toward the service station where the new waiter stood. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair cropped close to his skull and a posture that screamed military rather than hospitality. His hands fumbled with the wine opener, fingers too thick and clumsy for the delicate work. Something about the way he held himself made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, a feeling I had learned to trust from years of living in neighborhoods where instinct meant survival. The dining room hummed with conversation in Italian and English, the clink of glasses, and the soft strains of Puccini floating from hidden speakers. I moved through the space like a ghost, refilling water glasses, clearing empty plates, anticipating needs before they were voiced. It was a skill I had perfected over 3 years at La Fenice, the ability to be present without being seen, to serve without intruding. My Nonna would have been proud of my efficiency, if not of the circumstances that had led me here. The Romano family had once been something in Naples, before the war scattered us across oceans. Caterina had told me stories of grand houses and olive groves, of alliances forged over generations and debts of honor that transcended money. I had always assumed they were fairy tales, the kind of embellishments old women used to make poverty feel less permanent. But sometimes, when I served certain customers, the ones with old names and older money, I caught glimpses of recognition in their eyes, as if they were seeing someone else's face superimposed over mine. Tonight, the private room was occupied by a party I had been warned about in whispers. The De Luca table, Marco had called it, with a reverence that bordered on fear. Matteo De Luca was not the kind of man whose name appeared in newspapers or whose face was known to the general public. He operated in shadows, his influence felt rather than seen, his power measured in the silence that fell when he entered a room rather than in the noise he made. I had never served him directly. That honor was reserved for senior staff. But I had watched him from a distance, noting the way other powerful men deferred to him, the way his mere presence seemed to shift the gravity of the room. The new waiter dropped a tray of glasses near the kitchen door, the crash cutting through the ambient noise like a gunshot. I winced, watching as he scrambled to collect the shards, his movements jerky and unpracticed. Marco materialized beside him, hissing reprimands in rapid Italian that the man clearly didn't understand. Another warning bell chimed in my mind. What kind of agency sent a waiter who didn't speak Italian to La Fenice? I delivered the check to table 12, collected the empty wine glasses from the bar, and found myself drifting closer to the service station, where the new man stood, pretending to organize napkins. Up close, I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes kept flicking toward the private room where Matteo De Luca sat with his associates. His gaze wasn't the curious glance of someone starstruck by proximity to power. It was focused, calculating, the look of a hunter watching prey. The chill that ran down my spine had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I positioned myself near the coffee station, polishing glasses that were already clean, watching the stranger from the corner of my eye. His jacket hung strangely on the left side, a subtle bulge that most people would miss, but that I recognized from growing up in the Bronx, from knowing boys who carried protection in their waistbands, and men who settled disputes with more than words. When he reached for a fresh stack of napkins, his sleeve rode up just enough to reveal something metallic strapped to his forearm. A knife, concealed beneath the fabric, positioned for quick access. My hands trembled as I set down the glass, mind racing through possibilities. Call Marco? He would demand proof, waste precious minutes questioning my judgment. Call the police? They would never arrive in time, and besides, La Fenice had an understanding with certain authorities that made official intervention complicated. Warn someone from De Luca's table? I didn't know their protocols, didn't know if approaching would be seen as a threat rather than help. The stranger was moving now, abandoning his pretense of work, drifting toward the hallway that led to the private room. His hand slipped inside his jacket, fingers curling around something I couldn't see. Time compressed into heartbeats, each one pounding in my ears like a drum. I grabbed the wine jug from the counter and a pen from my apron pocket, scrawling words across my palm with desperate speed. The ink smeared against my damp skin, but the message was legible. It had to be. I walked toward the private room with the confidence of someone who had every right to be there, my server's smile fixed firmly in place, despite the terror clawing at my chest. The stranger was just ahead of me, his pace quickening, his intent unmistakable. I pushed past him with a muttered "Scusi" and entered the room first, crossing directly to where Matteo De Luca sat at the head of the table. He looked up as I approached, and for the first time I saw his face clearly. Strong jaw shadowed with stubble, dark eyes that held intelligence, and something harder beneath, cheekbones that could have been carved from marble. A face that belonged on Renaissance paintings, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. His hair was swept back in the classic Italian style, silver watch gleaming at his wrist, the collar of his tailored shirt open just enough to reveal a gold chain resting against olive skin. I lifted the wine jug with my left hand and began to pour, angling my body so that my right palm faced him, the desperate message scrawled across my skin visible only to his eyes. Fake waiter, you're the target tonight. Run. His gaze dropped to my hand, and I watched understanding register in his expression with no visible change at all. No widening of eyes, no sharp intake of breath, no betrayal of alarm. He simply looked at my palm, read the words, and then lifted his eyes to mine with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. For 3 seconds that stretched into eternity, we stared at each other. A stranger who had just risked everything to warn a man she didn't know, and a man whose life depended on trusting the word of a waitress he had never noticed before. In those 3 seconds, something passed between us. Recognition of a different kind. An acknowledgement of courage that transcended the circumstances. Then Matteo De Luca reached for his napkin, dabbed his mouth with casual elegance, and rose from his chair as if he had simply remembered an important phone call. He said something to his associates in dialect, too fast for me to follow, and then he was walking toward the side door, his movements unhurried, despite the death that had been stalking toward him. I continued pouring wine for the remaining guests, my hands steady now that the worst was done, my heart hammering against my ribs with enough force to crack bone. Behind me, I heard the stranger curse under his breath, heard the scuffle of feet as he realized his target had vanished. Heard Marco's confused questions about why the private room had suddenly emptied. The crisis had passed. The moment had ended. And yet, as I finished my rounds and retreated to the kitchen to catch my breath, I knew with absolute certainty that something had just begun. The remainder of my shift passed in a blur of mechanical movements and forced smiles, my body going through the motions while my mind replayed those 3 seconds on an endless loop. The weight of what I had done settled over me slowly, like snow accumulating on a rooftop, each minute adding another layer of realization until I could barely breathe under the pressure. I had warned a MAFIA boss about an assassination attempt. I had involved myself in something that existed in a world far removed from my own, a world where debts were paid in blood and favors came with prices I couldn't imagine. The stranger had disappeared shortly after Matteo left, slipping out through the kitchen entrance, while Marco was distracted by the chaos of the private room's sudden departure. No one questioned his absence. Agency workers came and went, faces easily forgotten in the constant churn of restaurant staff. But I would remember his face, the flat calculation in his eyes, the way his hand had moved toward that hidden blade. I would remember and wonder how close I had come to witnessing something irreversible. By the time I clocked out at 11, my feet ached, and my uniform smelled of garlic and fatigue. The October night had turned cold, a sharp wind cutting through the thin jacket I had grabbed that morning, when the weather still held traces of autumn warmth. I pushed through the side door into the alley, already planning the subway route home, already calculating how many hours of sleep I could salvage before my morning class at the community college. The black car idling at the mouth of the alley stopped me cold. It was sleek and expensive, the kind of vehicle that appeared in movies about powerful men and the women foolish enough to love them. The engine hummed with a quiet purr that spoke of German engineering and Italian taste. The windows tinted dark enough to hide whoever waited inside. My fingers tightened around my bag strap as every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to find another exit, to pretend I had never seen anything at all. Then the rear door opened, and Matteo De Luca stepped out. He looked different away from the chandeliers and starched tablecloths of La Fenice. His jacket was gone. Sleeves of his white shirt rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and a tattoo that curled from wrist to elbow in patterns I couldn't decipher in the dim light. The gold chain at his throat caught the street lamp's glow, and the ring on his right hand, a heavy signet bearing a crest I didn't recognize, gleamed as he leaned against the car door. "Signorina Romano," he said, and the sound of my surname in his voice sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cold. His Italian was smooth, accented with the particular cadence of someone who had learned it from family rather than textbooks. "You left before I could thank you properly. I stayed where I was, maintaining the distance between us like a talisman against whatever was about to happen. I was just doing my job." His laugh was soft, unexpected. "Your job is to pour wine, not to save lives. That requires something else entirely." He pushed away from the car and took a step toward me, and despite myself, I took a step back. The smile that curved his lips suggested he had noticed and found it amusing. "I'm not going to hurt you, Julia. I came to express my gratitude." The use of my first name startled me. "How do you know?" "I know everything about every person who works in that restaurant." He said it without arrogance, simply stating a fact. Background checks, family histories, financial situations. It's how I stay alive in my particular line of work. His eyes, dark and unreadable, held mine with an intensity that made my stomach tighten. "Julia Romano, 23 years old, student at Bronx Community College, majoring in business administration, raised by your grandmother Caterina Romano after your parents died in a car accident when you were 7. Currently residing in a studio apartment on Tremont Avenue, 3 months behind on rent because your financial aid was delayed." The clinical recitation of my life felt like a violation, each detail stripped away and examined under harsh light. "You've been watching me." I watch everyone." He took another step closer, and this time I held my ground. "But until tonight, you were just a name in a file. Now you're the woman who saw what no one else saw and acted when no one else would. That makes you interesting, Julia Romano." The way he said interesting made my pulse quicken in ways I refused to examine. "I don't want to be interesting to you. Want has very little to do with it." He reached into his pocket, and I tensed, half expecting a weapon despite his assurances. Instead, he produced a business card, thick cream-colored paper with a single phone number embossed in gold. "The man you saw tonight was working for a group that has been trying to remove me from my position for months. They've killed 3 of my associates, burned 2 of my properties, and tonight they came within seconds of achieving their goal." His voice remained steady, conversational, as if discussing weather rather than murder. "You stopped that. I owe you a debt." I stared at the card but didn't take it. "I don't want anything from you. Everyone wants something." He stepped closer still, close enough that I could smell his cologne, sandalwood and something darker, more expensive, and see the faint scar that ran along his jaw. Protection. Money. Opportunity. You've been struggling for years, Julia. Fighting alone against a world that doesn't reward struggle. I could change that. The offer hung between us, glittering with possibility and danger. I thought of my grandmother's stories, of the Romano family's lost glory, and the debts of honor that had shaped her world. I thought of the overdue rent notices piling up on my counter, the textbooks I couldn't afford, the future I was slowly drowning trying to reach. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you help someone you've never met?" Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the mask of control he wore so effortlessly. "Romano," he repeated, as if tasting the word. My nonno used to speak of that name. He said the Romanos and the De Lucas were allies in the old country. Before the war separated us across oceans, he said they were people of honor, people who kept their word when everyone else broke theirs. His eyes searched my face, looking for something I couldn't identify. "When I saw your surname on the staff roster, I wondered if it was coincidence. Now I think perhaps it was something else. The idea that our families had been connected generations before, that destiny or fate or simple coincidence had brought us to this moment, was too strange to process." I shook my head, taking a step back toward the safety of the alley. "I don't believe in fate." Neither did I. He didn't pursue me, didn't push, until tonight. A door opened somewhere behind me, voices spilling into the night as other staff members finished their shifts. The spell of the moment shattered, and I was suddenly aware of how exposed we were, how easily this conversation could be misinterpreted by anyone who saw us. "I need to go," I said, turning toward the street. "Julia." My name stopped me more effectively than any physical barrier. "The man who came for me tonight won't be the last. They know you warned me. They have people everywhere, watching, waiting. You're not safe anymore." I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt strangely calm, as if a part of me had been waiting for this, preparing for this, without ever knowing why. "I've never been safe," I said quietly. "That's not new." "Then let me offer you something that is." He held out the card again. "Protection. No strings, no obligations, just the knowledge that someone is watching out for you. Why would you do that for a stranger?" His smile was small, almost sad. "Because my grandfather would have wanted me to. Because the Romano saved his life once, long ago, and a De Luca always repays his debts." He pressed the card into my hand, his fingers warm against my cold skin. "Think about it. And when you're ready to talk, call that number. Anytime, day or night. Before I could respond, he was sliding back into the car, the door closing with a soft thunk of expensive machinery. The engine purred to life, and then he was gone, taillights disappearing around the corner, leaving me standing alone in the October cold with a business card burning in my palm and questions multiplying faster than I could count. I didn't call that night, or the next night, or the night after that. But I kept the card, and every time I walked to work, every time I took the subway home, every time I lay awake in my tiny apartment listening to the sounds of the city, I felt eyes on me that hadn't been there before. Watching, waiting. Whether they belonged to Mateo's people or to the enemies he had warned me about, I couldn't say. What I did know was that my life had changed in the span of 3 seconds, and a message scrawled on my palm, and there was no going back to the woman I had been before. 3 weeks passed before I saw him again. The days had taken on a strange quality, ordinary moments punctuated by flashes of hyper-awareness that left me exhausted. I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. The same car parked across from my building 2 days in a row, a man lingering too long near the subway entrance, the subtle weight of being observed even when I couldn't identify the observer. Mateo had warned me that I wasn't safe anymore, and while I had dismissed his words as theatrical exaggeration, reality had slowly proven him right. Someone had broken into my apartment while I was at class. Nothing was stolen, I had nothing worth taking, but drawers had been opened, papers shuffled, the careful organization of my grandmother's photographs disrupted. Whoever had searched my space had been professional, leaving no fingerprints, no damage, nothing I could report to police without sounding paranoid. But I knew. I could feel the violation in my bones. The knowledge that strangers had touched my things, breathed my air, stood where I stood. That night, I finally called the number on the card. He arrived within the hour. The knock at my door was soft, almost tentative, nothing like the forceful entry I had half expected. When I opened it, Mateo stood in my narrow hallway, looking impossibly out of place in his tailored coat and leather shoes against the backdrop of peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights. His expression was carefully neutral, but something in his eyes shifted when he saw my face, reading the fear I thought I had hidden. "May I come in?" I stepped aside, letting him enter the space that suddenly seemed smaller, shabbier, more inadequate in his presence. He didn't comment on the water stain on the ceiling, or the second-hand furniture, or the bare walls that I had never bothered to decorate. Instead, his gaze swept the room with professional efficiency, noting entry points, sight lines, potential vulnerabilities. "When did this happen?" he asked, already knowing what I was going to tell him. "Today, while I was at school." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the working radiator. "They went through everything. My Nonna's letters, my photographs, even my class notes." My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated myself for the weakness. Why would they do that? "They're looking for leverage." He turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw genuine anger in his expression. Not the cold, controlled kind, but something hotter, more personal. Something they can use against you if you become a problem. Evidence of secrets, connections, anything that might make you vulnerable. He paused, studying my face. "Did your grandmother leave you anything? Documents, letters, objects from the old country?" The question caught me off guard. "Just her jewelry box and some photographs. Nothing valuable." "May I see them?" Something in his tone made me hesitate, but I led him to the small chest that sat on my dresser, a wooden box carved with flowers that my Nonna had carried from Naples when she emigrated at 17. I opened it to reveal the modest contents. A string of glass beads, a tarnished silver ring, a faded photograph of a young woman standing before a villa I didn't recognize. Mateo picked up the photograph with careful reverence, holding it to the light as if searching for hidden messages in the sepia tones. His expression changed, subtle, but unmistakable. Recognition, surprise, something deeper that I couldn't name. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, his voice strangely rough. I shook my head. My nonna never talked about her life in Italy. She would tell stories, but never about her family, never about why she left. I always assumed it was too painful. He set the photograph down gently, his fingers lingering on the edge. "This villa belonged to my family, 3 generations ago, before the war. And the woman in this photograph..." He paused, and when he looked at me, there was something new in his eyes, something that made my heart pound in my chest. "She was my great-grandmother's closest friend, Caterina Romano, your grandmother." The words took a moment to penetrate, and when they did, the room seemed to tilt around me. "That's impossible. Look at the inscription on the back." I picked up the photograph with trembling fingers and turned it over. There, in faded ink, was a line of Italian script I had never noticed before. "Per sempre insieme, fino alla fine, CRELD Napoli, 1938. Forever together, until the end. CR and LD. Lucia De Luca," Matteo said quietly. "My nonno's mother. She and your grandmother were like sisters. When the war came and the families had to scatter, they swore to protect each other's descendants, no matter where fate carried them." I sank onto the edge of my bed, the photograph clutched in my hands, trying to reconcile this revelation with everything I thought I knew about my family. My grandmother had never mentioned the De Lucas, never hinted at a connection that went back generations. She had raised me with stories of Naples, but always as if it were a distant fairy tale, not a living history that might someday reach out and claim me. "Why wouldn't she tell me?" I whispered. Matteo sat beside me, not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Perhaps she wanted to protect you. The De Luca family's reputation grew darker over the years. Perhaps she hoped that by keeping you ignorant, she could keep you safe from a world she had escaped." I thought of my nonna's face when I told her about my job at La Fenice, the strange expression that had flickered across her features before she smiled and wished me well. Had she known? Had she suspected that working in that restaurant might eventually bring me into contact with the family she had spent a lifetime avoiding? "This doesn't change anything," I said, more to convince myself than him. "Just because our grandmothers were friends doesn't mean it changes everything." His voice was gentle but firm. "You saved my life, Julia. Now I understand why. It wasn't coincidence or luck, or even your natural courage, though you have plenty of that. It was something older, deeper, the bond between our families calling across generations, demanding to be honored." The intensity in his eyes made it hard to breathe. I looked away, focusing on the photograph, on the faces of 2 young women who had lived and loved and lost in a world that no longer existed. "Tell me about her," I said. "Lucia De Luca. Tell me about the friendship they shared." And so he did. For hours, we sat in my cramped apartment, while Matteo wove stories of Naples before the war, of 2 families who had built empires side by side, of the love between Caterina and Lucia that had transcended the boundaries of blood and marriage. He spoke of his great-grandmother with a tenderness that surprised me, revealing depths beneath the dangerous exterior that I hadn't expected to find. I listened, asking questions, filling in the gaps of a history I had never known I was missing. When he finally stopped, the first gray light of dawn was creeping through my window. We had talked through the entire night, and somehow, impossibly, the fear that had driven me to call him had transformed into something else entirely. "You should sleep," he said, rising from the bed with a stiffness that suggested he, too, felt the exhaustion. "I'll have someone watch the building. You won't be disturbed again." I walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him go. Matteo. His name felt strange on my tongue, intimate in a way I hadn't intended. What happens now? He turned in the doorway, his face half in shadow. Now we honor the bond our grandmothers created. I protect you because I owe it to them, and to the man I want to be. His hand came up, brushing a strand of hair from my face with infinite gentleness. And perhaps, if you're willing, we discover what else our family's left for us to find. He was gone before I could respond, leaving me standing in my doorway with the scent of his cologne lingering in the air and a photograph pressed against my heart. He came back the next evening, and the evening after that. Always at the same time, just after sunset, when the city transformed from the harshness of day into something softer, more forgiving. He never announced his visits, never called ahead. He simply appeared at my door with coffee from the Italian bakery on Arthur Avenue or pastries wrapped in wax paper, small offerings that felt enormous in their thoughtfulness. We would sit at my tiny table or on the fire escape overlooking the street, talking about everything and nothing, building something I didn't have a name for. Matteo was not the man I had expected. The stories I had heard about him, whispered warnings from co-workers, carefully worded cautions from Marco, painted a portrait of ruthless calculation, of violence wielded without remorse, of a man who had clawed his way to power over the bodies of those who opposed him. And perhaps those stories were true. I saw glimpses of that man sometimes, in the cold efficiency with which he issued orders into his phone, in the way his associates deferred to him with a respect that bordered on fear. But there was another Matteo, one that emerged only in the quiet moments between us. He quoted Dante from memory, his accent thickening with emotion as he recited passages his grandmother had taught him. He laughed at my terrible attempts to cook my nonna's recipes, then rolled up his sleeves and showed me the proper way to fold gnocchi, his hands moving with a competence that suggested hidden domesticity. He listened when I talked about my dreams of opening a small business someday, of building something that was mine alone. And he asked questions that showed he actually cared about the answers. Why did you stay in this life? I asked him one evening, as we watched the sunset paint the Bronx in shades of gold and amber. You're intelligent, educated. You could have done anything. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the horizon with an expression I couldn't read. Because it's who I am, he said finally. My family built something here, something that matters to our community, even if the rest of the world calls it criminal. We protect people who have no one else to protect them. We settle disputes that the police ignore. We're the ones they call when the system fails them. And the violence? His jaw tightened. A necessary evil. I don't enjoy it, Julia. Every life I've taken weighs on me, even the ones who deserved it. But in my world, mercy is often mistaken for weakness, and weakness gets people killed. He turned to face me, his eyes holding mine with painful honesty. I won't pretend to be someone I'm not. This is what I am, a man who does terrible things to protect the people he loves. If that frightens you, I understand. It should have frightened me. Every rational part of my brain screamed that I was playing with fire, that this connection could only end in disaster. But when I looked at Matteo, I didn't see a monster. I saw a man shaped by circumstances he hadn't chosen, carrying burdens that would have broken someone weaker, fighting to maintain honor in a world that rewarded dishonesty. I'm not afraid of you, I said quietly. The relief that flickered across his face was so profound, so unexpected, that it made my chest ache. He reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that felt both new and ancient, as if we had been holding hands across lifetimes without knowing it. My grandfather used to say that a man's worth is measured by the woman who stands beside him, he murmured. I never understood what he meant until now. The moment stretched between us, charged with possibility and danger. I knew what was about to happen, could feel it building like pressure before a storm. And for the first time in my life, I didn't run from it. His kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. His lips brushed mine with exquisite tenderness, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to choose caution over desire. When I didn't, when I leaned into him, answering his question with one of my own, something shifted in the air between us. The kiss deepened, his hand coming up to cup my face while the other pulled me closer. And for one perfect moment, the world narrowed to the taste of him, the feel of him, the impossible rightness of being exactly where I was. When we finally separated, both breathing harder than we should have been, his forehead rested against mine. "I've been alone for a long time," he whispered, not by circumstance, but by choice. "In my position, attachments are dangerous. Loving someone means giving your enemies a weapon to use against you." His thumb traced the line of my jaw, and I shivered despite the warmth of the evening. "But with you, I can't seem to remember why that mattered." "Maybe it doesn't have to matter," I heard myself say. "Maybe some risks are worth taking." His laugh was soft, almost rueful. "You sound like your grandmother. My nonno used to say she was the bravest woman he ever knew, foolish enough to believe in love in a world designed to destroy it." "And was she right? Did love survive?" "She died in your grandmother's arms," he said, the words catching in his throat. "After the war, after everything they'd lost, they found each other again, here in America, and spent their final years together. My family thought Lucia had gone senile when she left our compound to live with the Romano woman in the Bronx. But I think she just remembered what really mattered. The image, two old women who had survived war and loss and decades of separation, reunited at the end, brought tears to my eyes. I understood now why my nonna had never spoken of the DeLucas, why she had kept that part of her history locked away. The pain of losing Lucia would have been too great to revisit, the memories too precious to share with anyone who hadn't lived them. "They'd be happy," I said softly, "knowing we found each other." Matteo pulled me close, wrapping his arms around me as if he could shield me from everything that waited beyond this moment. "They'd tell us we're fools," he corrected. "And they'd be right. This is dangerous, Julia. Being with me paints a target on your back." "There's already a target on my back," I reminded him. "At least this way, I'm not facing it alone." We stayed on the fire escape until the stars came out, talking about the future we were slowly building from the rubble of our separate pasts. He told me about his plans to legitimize more of his businesses, to move his family's empire out of the shadows and into the light. I told him about my dreams of finishing school, of proving that a Romano could succeed without relying on anyone else's protection. Neither of us mentioned the obvious obstacles, the enemies who wanted him dead, the world that would never accept our relationship, the danger that now touched both our lives. For one night, we allowed ourselves to pretend that love was enough. We would learn soon enough that it wasn't. The attack came 3 days later. I was walking home from the subway, bag heavy with textbooks, mind occupied with an upcoming exam. The street was quiet, the kind of October evening that made the Bronx feel almost peaceful, leaves skittering across the sidewalk like whispered secrets. I didn't notice the van until it pulled alongside me, didn't register the danger until the side door slid open and hands reached out to drag me inside. I fought. My grandmother had taught me to fight, had made sure I knew how to throw a punch and break a grip, lessons I had dismissed as unnecessary until that moment. I clawed at the hands holding me, screamed as loud as my lungs allowed, twisted and kicked with everything I had. But there were too many of them, too strong, too practiced at this particular kind of violence. A cloth pressed over my face, acrid chemicals flooding my nose and mouth, and the world dissolved into darkness. When I woke, I was in a warehouse, Industrial lighting cast harsh shadows across concrete floors stained with substances I didn't want to identify. My hands were bound behind me, rope digging into my wrists, and my head pounded with the aftermath of whatever drug they had used to subdue me. 3 men stood nearby, speaking in Russian, a language I didn't understand but recognized from movies and the occasional Brighton Beach delivery to La Fenice. One of them noticed I was awake and said something to the others. They laughed, a sound that made my blood run cold. "The DeLuca's whore," one of them said in heavily accented English. "Now we see how much he will pay to get her back." Fear clawed at my throat, but beneath it something else stirred. Anger, defiance, the stubborn Romano pride that my grandmother had instilled in me alongside the fighting lessons. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me cower. "He won't pay anything," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm nobody to him." The man who had spoken crouched before me, his face too close, his breath sour with cheap alcohol. "We have been watching, little girl. We see him come to your apartment. We see him kiss you on the fire escape like a lovesick boy. Matteo DeLuca does not kiss women he does not care for." His smile was cruel. "He will pay, or we will send you back to him in pieces." The door to the warehouse crashed open. What happened next existed in fragments, snapshots of violence that my mind struggled to process. Men pouring through the entrance, moving with military precision. Gunshots echoing off concrete walls, bodies falling. And in the center of it all, Matteo, his face a mask of cold fury that I had never seen before and hoped never to see again. He killed the man who had threatened me without hesitation, without mercy. Then he was cutting my bonds, gathering me against his chest, murmuring words in Italian that I was too shocked to translate. His hands moved over me, checking for injuries, his touch simultaneously gentle and desperate. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "Did they—" "I'm okay." The words came out in a sob. "I'm okay, Matteo. I'm okay." He carried me out of that warehouse like I weighed nothing, past the bodies of the men who had taken me, past his own soldiers who averted their eyes out of respect. A car waited outside, engine running, and he placed me in the back seat with a tenderness that contrasted violently with what he had just done. The drive passed in silence. I curled against his side, trembling with delayed shock, while his hand stroked my hair in a continuous, soothing rhythm. When we arrived at his compound, a fortress of a house in Westchester that I had only seen from outside, he carried me inside and didn't set me down until we reached a bedroom decorated in soft blues and creams. "You're safe now," he said, his voice rough. "They'll never touch you again. I swear it on my grandfather's grave." "How did you find me?" "The tracker." He pressed a kiss to my forehead. "I had one sewn into your coat the day after they broke into your apartment. I should have told you, but I knew you'd refuse." His jaw tightened. "If I had been even 5 minutes later—" "You weren't." I reached up to touch his face, feeling the tension beneath his skin. "You came for me. I will always come for you." The intensity in his voice was almost frightening. "Do you understand, Julia? Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do, you are mine to protect now." The possessiveness in his words should have alarmed me. Instead, it settled something deep inside my chest, filling spaces I hadn't known were empty. In that moment, surrounded by evidence of his power and violence, I understood for the first time what it meant to be loved by a man like Matteo DeLuca. It meant being protected at any cost. It meant being treasured like something precious. It meant accepting that the same hands that held me so gently were capable of unspeakable things when that protection was threatened. "I'm not leaving," I said softly. "Not anymore." The relief in his expression was profound enough to break hearts. He pulled me close, and I buried my face in his chest, breathing in the scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne, of violence and tenderness intertwined. We stayed like that for a long time, Two people bound by blood and history and something newer, more fragile, that was growing between us despite every reason it shouldn't. "Marry me," he whispered against my hair. I pulled back, searching his face for any sign that he was joking. There was none. His expression was utterly serious, utterly vulnerable in a way I suspected few people had ever seen. "Matteo, not today, not tomorrow, but someday, when this is over, when I've made this world safe enough for you to walk in it freely." His hands cupped my face, thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized I was shedding. "Say you'll marry me, Giulia Romano. Say you'll be my wife, my partner, the mother of my children. Say you'll stand beside me until the end." The words echoed in my mind, tangling with the inscription on that old photograph. "Per sempre insieme, fino alla fine." Forever together, until the end. "Yes," I breathed. "Yes, Matteo. Yes." His kiss tasted like salvation and danger, like everything I had ever feared and everything I had ever wanted. And as he held me in that room filled with soft blue light, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. Two families finally reunited after generations apart. Two hearts that had found each other across time and tragedy. The world outside might call us fools. It might try to destroy us. But we were Romanos and De Lucas, heirs to a love that had survived war and loss and decades of silence. We would survive this, too. 6 months later, I stood at the altar of St. Anthony's Church in Little Italy, wearing my grandmother's wedding dress that had been carefully preserved in tissue paper for 60 years. The lace was yellowed with age, the style decades out of fashion, but I wouldn't have worn anything else. It was my Nonna's blessing from beyond the grave, her approval of a marriage she had somehow always known would happen. The church was filled with people from two worlds, Matteo's associates in their expensive suits, my classmates from the community college, elderly Italian women who had known my grandmother and remembered the Romano name from stories their own mothers had told. Father Giuseppe, who had baptized me as an infant, stood at the front with a smile that suggested he, too, felt the weight of history being completed in this moment. And there was Matteo. He stood before the altar in a suit that probably cost more than a car. His hair swept back in that classic style, the gold chain at his throat catching the candlelight. But it was his expression that stole my breath, the naked love in his eyes, the trembling of his hands as he reached for mine, the way his voice cracked when he spoke the vows that would bind us together. "I, Matteo De Luca, take you, Giulia Romano, as my wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." The words were traditional, expected, but the ones that came after were not. "I swear to you, before God and our families, that I will protect you with every breath in my body. I will love you with a love that transcends the sins of my past and the dangers of my future. You are the light in my darkness, the peace in my chaos, the reason I fight to become a better man." His voice dropped, becoming something private even in that crowded church. Our grandmothers promised to stand beside each other until the end. Today I make that same promise to you, their granddaughter, their legacy. Per sempre insieme, fino alla fine. Tears streamed down my face as I spoke my own vows, words I had written in the small hours of the morning when sleep wouldn't come. I, Giulia Romano, take you, Matteo De Luca, as my husband. I come to you not as the naive girl who stumbled into your world by accident, but as a woman who has seen your darkness and your light and chooses both. I know what you are. I know what loving you means. And I choose it anyway, freely, completely, with every part of who I am. I squeezed his hands, feeling the strength in his fingers, the steadiness that had become my anchor. My grandmother taught me that love is an act of courage. Today, I prove her right. When Father Giuseppe pronounced us husband and wife, the applause that filled the church felt like the closing of a circle that had been left open for 3 generations. Matteo kissed me with the same tenderness he had shown that first night on my fire escape, the same passion he had revealed in the warehouse when he thought he might lose me, and something ancient and new sealed between us. At the reception, held in the back room of La Fenice where our story had begun, I found myself standing before a table covered in photographs. My grandmother, with her friend Lucia in Naples, young and beautiful, full of hopes that war would soon scatter. My grandmother alone in New York, rebuilding a life from nothing. My parents on their wedding day, my mother's smile so like my own. And now, Matteo and me, the latest chapter in a story that stretched back decades. "Your grandmother would be proud," said an elderly woman I didn't recognize, her accent thick with the cadence of the old country. She always said the Romanos and De Lucas would find each other again. She said fate doesn't forget its promises. "Did you know her?" I asked, surprised. The woman smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I was there when she and Lucia said goodbye, the night the war took everything from us. I was there when they found each other again, 50 years later, on this very street." She pressed a gnarled hand to my cheek. "Some loves are too strong to be broken by time or distance or death. Yours is one of them, child. Never doubt it." She disappeared into the crowd before I could ask her name, leaving me with questions that would probably never be answered. Matteo appeared at my side, wrapping an arm around my waist. "You look thoughtful." "I was thinking about fate," I admitted, "about how one wrong text message led to all of this." His laugh was low, intimate. "It wasn't a wrong message, Julia. It was the right message, at the right time, to the right person." He pressed a kiss to my temple. "My grandfather always said there are no accidents in this world, only plans we don't understand yet." I leaned into him, letting his warmth chase away the lingering chill of questions without answers. Around us, the celebration continued. Toasts in Italian and English, plates of food that my grandmother would have approved of, music that made even the oldest guests tap their feet. This was my life now, this strange blend of danger and domesticity, of love forged in the fire of violence and tenderness. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the staff had begun cleaning, Matteo led me out to the alley where we had stood 6 months before, where he had waited for me in the dark and changed the trajectory of my entire life. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket. "A wedding gift." He placed an envelope in my hands. Inside was a deed to a small building on Arthur Avenue, the kind of space I had always dreamed of turning into my own business. "It's yours," he said quietly. "No strings, no obligations. Whatever happens between us, that building belongs to you. Your grandmother would have wanted you to have something that was truly your own." The generosity of the gift overwhelmed me. I threw my arms around his neck, feeling the solid strength of him, the heartbeat that pounded against my chest. "I love you," I whispered. "I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you, Matteo De Luca." His arms tightened around me. "And I love you, Julia De Luca." The name, my new name, settled over me like a blessing and a burden, a symbol of everything I had gained and everything I had risked. I was no longer the struggling waitress who had noticed a knife hidden in a sleeve. I was the wife of one of the most powerful men in New York, the heir to a legacy of love that stretched back generations, the woman who had opened her palm and changed destiny with 5 scrawled words. As we stood in that alley, wrapped in each other's arms while the city hummed around us, I thought about the photograph still sitting on my dresser at home. 2 young women in Naples, promising to stand beside each other until the end. Their story had come full circle, and ours was just beginning. The first year of marriage taught me things about myself I had never known. I learned that I could walk into a room full of dangerous men and command their respect, not because of the ring on my finger, but because I had earned it through actions they understood. I learned that love could coexist with fear, that tenderness could live alongside violence, that the same hands that killed to protect me could hold me through nightmares with impossible gentleness. I learned that my grandmother had been right about courage. It wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The building Matteo had given me on Arthur Avenue became Romano's, a small Italian bakery and cafe that served my nonna's recipes to a neighborhood hungry for authenticity. I woke before dawn each morning to knead dough and prepare the sfogliatelle that had been her specialty, the flaky pastries filled with ricotta and candied citrus that sold out before noon every day. The work was exhausting, the hours brutal, but for the first time in my life, I was building something that belonged entirely to me. Matteo supported my independence with a ferocity that surprised me. He refused to let his name appear anywhere on the business documents, insisted that every decision remain mine alone, and threatened bodily harm to any associate who suggested that Romano's was merely a front for DeLuca operations. "Your grandmother didn't raise you to be anyone's shadow," he told me one night, his fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder as we lay tangled in our bed. "She raised you to be a light. I won't be the one who dims it." But the world he inhabited didn't care about his good intentions. The Russians who had taken me had been eliminated, their organization dismantled in a systematic campaign of violence that Matteo never discussed, but that I read about in newspaper headlines. Still, threats continued to materialize like weeds pushing through concrete. A rival family from Chicago who saw opportunity in perceived weakness. A corrupt federal agent who demanded tribute in exchange for ignoring certain activities. A nephew of a man Matteo had killed years ago, now grown and hungry for revenge. Each threat brought the same response, swift, decisive, and ultimately bloody. I tried not to think about what Matteo did when he disappeared for days at a time, returning with shadows in his eyes and tension in his shoulders that took hours of my touch to ease. I tried not to count the funerals I attended, standing beside him in black dresses while he offered condolences to widows and orphans created by the violence of his world. I tried not to notice the way certain names were never mentioned after certain dates, erased from conversation as thoroughly as they had been erased from existence. But I noticed. I always noticed. "How do you live with it?" I asked him one evening as autumn painted the trees outside our bedroom window in shades of fire. "The weight of what you've done?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling with an expression I couldn't read. "I don't," he admitted finally. "Not really. I carry it, Julia. Every life I've taken, every family I've destroyed, every choice that led to blood instead of peace. I carry them all, every day, and I will carry them until I die." He turned to face me, his dark eyes holding mine with painful honesty. "But I made peace with that burden long ago. It's the price of protecting what matters. And you..." His hand found mine, fingers intertwining. "You matter more than my conscience." The admission should have horrified me. Instead, it broke my heart in ways I couldn't explain. This man, this dangerous, powerful, terrifying man, had sacrificed his soul to keep me safe. How could I judge him for that when I benefited from every sin he committed? "I don't want you to lose yourself," I whispered. "Not for me. Not for anyone." His smile was sad, ancient. "I lost myself years ago, amore mio. You're not the reason. You're the only thing that makes the loss bearable." Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and morning sickness. I discovered I was pregnant on a Tuesday, standing in the bathroom of Romano's with a positive test, clutched in trembling hands. The timing was terrible. The business was finally turning a profit, My relationship with Matteo had found its rhythm. The threats against us had quieted to a manageable simmer. A baby would change everything, would add another vulnerability to a life already filled with them. And yet, when I told Matteo that evening, watching his face transform from confusion to understanding to overwhelming joy, I knew I had made the right choice. He fell to his knees before me, pressing his forehead to my still flat stomach, murmuring words in Italian that I was too emotional to translate. His shoulders shook with sobs he didn't try to hide, and I ran my fingers through his hair, marveling at this man who could order executions without flinching, but who wept at the thought of becoming a father. "A baby," he breathed, looking up at me with eyes that shone with tears. Our baby, a Romano and a De Luca, finally united after all these years. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, watched over by the best doctors money could buy, and guarded by men who would die before letting harm reach me. Matteo became almost unbearably protective, hovering over me like a shadow, personally tasting every meal I ate, sleeping with one hand on my growing belly as if he could shield our child even in dreams. His obsession with my safety crossed the line into absurdity more than once. Armed guards at my prenatal appointments, bulletproof glass installed in the bakery windows, a panic room built into our bedroom closet. "You're being ridiculous," I told him, exasperated after he insisted on accompanying me to buy maternity clothes. "No one is going to attack me at a department store." "You don't know that," he countered, scanning the racks of clothing with the same intensity he probably used to survey potential ambush sites. "Enemies strike when you least expect it. That's what makes them enemies." I rolled my eyes but didn't argue. There was no winning against Matteo's paranoia, not when it came to my protection. The attack came in the 7th month, not against me, but against him. I was in the bakery when the call came, kneading dough for the next day's bread, flour dusting my swollen belly and aching back. Marco, Matteo's second in command, delivered the news in a voice carefully stripped of emotion. There had been an ambush, 3 of our men were dead, and Matteo had been shot twice before escaping. The drive to the hospital existed outside of time. I sat in the back of the armored car, hands pressed against my stomach, praying to every saint my grandmother had ever invoked. The baby kicked frantically, responding to my distress, and I whispered reassurances I didn't believe. "It's okay. Daddy's going to be okay. We're all going to be okay." Matteo was in surgery when I arrived, doctors fighting to remove bullets from his chest and shoulder. I waited in a private room filled with flowers and security personnel, watching the clock tick away hours that felt like centuries. Marco brought me food I couldn't eat, water I couldn't drink, updates that told me nothing except that my husband was still alive, still fighting, still refusing to leave me alone in this world. When they finally let me see him, he was pale as death, tubes and wires connecting him to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical indifference. But his eyes opened when I took his hand, and the smile that curved his cracked lips was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "Julia," he whispered, his voice rough from the breathing tube they had removed. "The baby?" "Fine," I managed, tears streaming down my face. "We're both fine. It's you we're worried about." He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "I told you I would always come for you. Even death can't break that promise." The recovery was slow, complicated by infections and setbacks that tested both our endurance. I divided my time between the hospital and the bakery, refusing to let either responsibility suffer despite the exhaustion that weighted my every step. The baby grew larger, more insistent, demanding attention through kicks and hiccups, and midnight cravings that sent guards scrambling to find anchovy pizza at 3 a.m. And somehow, impossibly, we survived. Matteo came home 6 weeks before my due date, thinner and weaker than I had ever seen him, but alive. The men who had attacked him were dealt with in ways I didn't ask about, their organization absorbed into De Luca Holdings, their families given the choice between loyalty and extinction. It was brutal, efficient, and entirely necessary. The kind of justice that existed in Matteo's world, the kind I had learned to accept without endorsement. "I thought I was going to lose you," I admitted one night, curled against his recovering body, careful not to press against his healing wounds. "I thought our daughter would never know her father." "Daughter?" His eyebrows rose. "You found out?" I smiled, pressing his hand against my belly where our child was performing her nightly acrobatics. "The doctors told me last week. I wanted to wait until you were strong enough to hear it." I paused, gathering courage. "I want to name her Caterina, after my grandmother." The tears that filled his eyes were answer enough. "Caterina Lucia de Luca," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For both of them. For the women who loved each other across generations and continents. For the promise they made that brought us together." Our daughter arrived on a spring morning, screaming her displeasure at being evicted from her comfortable home, her dark hair and light eyes a perfect blend of Romano and De Luca heritage. Matteo held her with the same reverence he had shown on our wedding day, his dangerous hands impossibly gentle against her tiny body, his eyes filled with a love so fierce it transformed him entirely. "Per sempre insieme," he whispered to her, the promise passing to another generation. "Fino alla fine," forever together, until the end. I watched them, my husband, my daughter, my impossible, improbable family, and understood finally what my grandmother had been trying to teach me all those years. Love wasn't safe. It wasn't rational or convenient or easy. It was a choice made over and over again, in the face of danger and doubt and darkness that threatened to consume everything. But it was worth it. Every risk, every fear, every moment of uncertainty. It was all worth it for this. For them. For us. The story of the Romanos and De Lucas had begun in Naples, survived war and separation, and generations of silence, and now continued in a nursery painted soft yellow, where a mafia boss sang Italian lullabies to his newborn daughter, while his wife watched from the doorway, heart fuller than she had ever imagined possible. Some loves really were too strong to be broken. Ours was one of them.